Hello everyone, my name is Josh and welcome to WHIMS. And today I'm going to give you my review for Deadpool and Wolverine. And first of all, I'm going to give you a quick update on what I'm doing with my 250th greatest films of all times, according to IMDb list. I tried to track down a copy of Dances with Wolves at my local DVD shop. I've looked on every streaming services going, Netflix, Amazon Prime, and I've even looked on Disney Plus and they don't have it. And I've even looked at my local DVD shop and they don't have it. I've even looked at CX in Sutton and they don't seem to have a copy anywhere. So until I actually track down another copy of the film, I'm going to have to actually put the IMDb 250 greatest films of all time, that particular entry on hold for now until I actually find a physical copy. So I will actually be having a review of it down soon. But even then, it's always kind of a gamble with these sorts of things because by the time I actually get around to tracking down a copy of that film, it could the 250th spot could change. And it's not just simply a thing of, oh, yeah, it happens every year or so. It's always every day, every 2 days, every 3 days. That spot will always change. So it's always kind of like a very difficult thing to read, and it's always like, well, how am I supposed to gauge what's going to be the 250th film if it keeps changing every day? So I find that very frustrating. But I am going to be sticking to my Dances with Wolves plan, and I am going to keep, doing the films on this list, and I'm going to try to, get as many reviews of that particular series done, and I'm going to do it every month as well, like I promised. But it is going to have to be on hold for now until I can actually find a physical copy. So hopefully by the end of August, I will have a copy of the film ready and I will be, watching it multiple times so I can get a review out before the end of the month. So hopefully that's my homework for this particular assignment. And I don't want to let you guys down, so please bear with me on the 250th greatest films of all time list with IMDb, because I literally have. I literally want to get it right and I want to get it done quickly so that you guys can have a really good review and have a good quality review. So I want to let you guys know that it is going to take some time, so please bear with me. And in other news, I've been reading a lot of books, and one of the books that I've been reading is the Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. And this book is really good so far. It's set in a fantasy setting where these children are basically kidnapped from a very early age. They're orphans, or they're essentially people who have been born into nobility, but they essentially are being kept in this library where they essentially have to read tons and tons and tons of books. Now, if I was a kid and I was trapped in a library, I think this isn't so much of a punishment, is it? It's more like a paradise, because me being surrounded by tons of books is me in my element. But if you were surrounded by books 24/7, you'd probably get sick of it. But what's really interesting is that they're not alone when they are in this library. They are confronted with all sorts of different characters, all sorts of different creatures, and all sorts of different supernatural beings. And it's a really good book so far. And of course, Mark Lawrence, the author of this book, has been compared to George R. R. Martin in how he writes a lot of his stories. So I'm a huge fan of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, and I was really happy to have actually picked this book up, and I'm looking forward to reading all the other books in his trilogy, and I will be eventually doing a review of this book sometime soon, so look forward to that at some point in the future. And right now, I'm not really all that far into the book. I'm only at like a small distance of it in the book. But it is a good book so far. It's very well written. So look forward to a review of that very soon. Now, let's get right back down to the main topic of this video. I'm going to be reviewing Deadpool and Wolverine, which came out in 2024. It's probably second only to Scream 6 to be the only recent film that has just been in cinemas to actually, be something that I've tackled on this channel, because all the other films that I've tackled have been films that have been out for years. And of course, this is the only one, this is the second one actually that I've done where it's actually been newly released to theatres. So Deadpool, to start off with, his character is essentially an assassin. He's essentially a paid contract assassin, or a contract, muscle that's been hired by various shady people to carry out business. As long as they pay very well, he can either kill them or he can threaten them. But he essentially is a guy who is essentially a gun for hire when we first meet him. But then he falls in love with a girl called Vanessa, and they're very much in love. They pretty much, their first bonding experience is them bonding how much of a traumatic childhood they've had. Like, say, for example, one character would say, oh, this person did this to me. And then, of course, he'll reply with, oh, yeah, I used to know a parent who used to beat me and put cigarettes out on me, kind of thing. And they constantly, are building up their trauma and saying things like, oh, these very shocking things. But it's meant to be funny, and you immediately get right off the bat that these two characters are using their trauma. They're basically using jokes and using comedy as a way of communicating that they don't let their trauma bother them, or they don't let their trauma define them. So after having many, many romantic encounters in the privacy of their own bedroom, Wade Wilson immediately contracts cancer. And he gets depressed, he gets very, angry and frustrated and very sad that he's probably going to die soon. And he finds himself in this very perfect place where he feels like he has a very perfect life with him and his partner Vanessa. So when he gets approached by a government official hoping to use him as a guinea pig for some sort of experimentation, he thinks it's going to be the cure to end all cures of cancer. Not only does he get horribly misled, but he gets trapped and imprisoned, underfed and tortured by lots of government officials who are planning on turning him into a mutant so that they can use him as slave labour. And what's very interesting about this development is not only does he get horrifically deformed, but also he ends up becoming essentially immortal. He can't die whenever he gets shot in the chest or in the head. He doesn't die, he falls down, but then he gets quickly back up again. If he gets his head cut off, his head grows back. If he gets limbs cut off, it grows back. Everything grows back. He essentially can't die. So this might seem like a very handy thing to have, but as we go deeper and deeper into the series, we find that this is actually a really, really terrible thing to have to go through. So the first film is a very straightforward love story. And he also breaks the fourth wall. He does a lot of, references to the fact he knows that he's a film character. He knows that he's doing this that he's in this comic book world or in this sort of film world, so he makes references to it, down to the opening credits being self-aware, like he says of the writers, they're the real heroes of this story or something like that, or oh, there's a British villain in this film and things like that. So there's all these self-aware gags, but he does it mostly for comedy. But there's also a tragedy to that element, and you can read it more into it when we get to the sequel. But the sequel basically is a much more well-defined sequel. It's one of the best sequels I've ever seen in recent years, where it essentially says, well, okay, let's have a scenario where the love interest dies, and the entire opening song not only is a wonderful reference and self-aware jab at this trope, but also it's a great way of highlighting the themes of the film, where the essential themes of Deadpool 2 are essentially about there are no inherently good or evil people in the world, and there is always a binary line, and sometimes that binary line that always defines good and evil is sometimes blurred. Like, the whole entire story is essentially there's this guy called Cable, played by Josh Brolin, who goes back in time to kill a mutant called Russell when he's very young, so that he can prevent him from murdering his parents during the apocalypse. So in doing so, he doesn't come across very well as the hero, he comes across more as the villain. And then we realise that he is going through trauma, just like Russell has gone through trauma when he was experimented on, and he saw the worst of humanity when he was being experimented on as a child. All of that, combined with Deadpool's signature self-aware humour, really makes this film such an incredible sequel to behold. And it really is funny, it has a lot of great gags, and I just think the whole entire idea of him basically using his self-awareness as a way of coping with all the trauma that's happened in his life, his very messed up childhood, to him being in the military and having to be kicked out of the military, and him having to go through that experimentation with becoming mutant, and him being deformed, and him having his self-confidence knocked, is such a wonderful character arc, and it really makes you realise that he's basically using this self-awareness and the fourth wall breaking as a way of coping with his trauma and his tragedy. And he basically, when his love interest, spoiler alert, Vanessa, dies, he actually becomes very self-destructive. He tries to... The first thing he does when his assassin kills his love interest is he grabs hold of the assassin and throws him and his assassin into a truck. So he tries to kill himself along with the person who killed his wife. And that just goes to show how messed up and how grief-stricken he is. And it's a really beautiful film. I'd highly recommend watching all 2 films in the Deadpool series before checking out this one. You don't necessarily have to. It pretty much works as a standalone story, but I think in order for completionist's sake, I would highly recommend checking out both of those films because they are both masterfully done, especially the sequel. And I feel like that's something that's very important to say. But let's get on to Deadpool and Wolverine. So, this film came out at the time when it was just announced that Fox is owned by Disney and they now own the rights to the Deadpool character. So what does Deadpool do in response to this? He goes to a snow-riddled forest and he decides to dig up the remains, spoiler alert by the way, for the entirety of X-Men Wolverine. And he decides to go into this snow-riddled forest and he decides to dig up the remains of Hugh Jackman and Logan's Wolverine. So he's basically just sitting there chatting with this skull, and he like has a grey beard, like the remnants of a grey beard on him, and then of course you have the adamantium sort of skeletal structure inside the actual human skeleton, which I thought was a very nice touch. And then when he actually, is talking to, Logan, and then he gets stopped by an organisation called the TVA, or the Time Variance Authority. And what the TVA basically stand for is they are essentially the people who essentially are monitoring all the different timelines throughout the cinematic universe. And what they are basically trying to do, that if a variant is straying from their timeline and dabbling in another timeline where they don't belong, the time variants come in and essentially escort them out. They're essentially like the security guards at a big concert with a big, national singer on the go or on the rise, and that's effectively what their job is. They're meant to basically. My favourite quote is, whenever a variant shits the bed and messes with the timeline, the TVA comes in and changes the sheets, as it were. So that's effectively what the TVA does, and it's actually a really wonderful idea to have Deadpool mingle with the TVA. And of course the TVA was first introduced in the first season of Loki, when Loki actually kind of messes with his own timeline and decides to grab the Tesseract, which is the big MacGuffin of the first Avengers film, and he goes into a different timeline to try to escape. The TVA come after him, and he goes through an entire character arc throughout the first 2 seasons of that show. So that's how they're first introduced. But this particular version of the TVA is completely different to the TVA in Loki. There's no Miss Minutes, for one thing, and there's also a lot of corruption and greed and self-serving attitudes. With the introduction of Paradox, played by Tom McFadden, who I've kind of talked about in the show Succession, which I'm a huge fan of. He plays a character called Tom Wamsgamps in that show, and he's a really funny character, but he's also really kind of condescending, and he's very kind of up his own arse kind of character, but he's also really funny and really compelling. But he basically plays his own version of that character, but with a British accent this time. So he's actually using his real accent when he's playing that character. But he is a very funny character and he's very compelling. But I really do like what this film does, because it really does do a very good job of kind of highlighting that Deadpool at this time in his life has gone through significant change. He's no longer the lone wolf. He's no longer a guy who says to himself, oh, I work alone. I don't want to be an X-Men. I don't want to be this. I don't want to be that. I don't want to be a part of a team. I work on my own. He no longer has that mentality anymore, because the first thing he does before he does anything else, he approaches Jon Favreau's character from the Iron Man series, and he says to him, I really want to be an Avenger. And at first when I first watched this, I thought, oh, that's kind of weird that he wants to be, a part of a team now. Since the first film, he wanted to be, on his own. He says, I work alone, I don't want to be an X-Men or anything like that. But the fact that he wants to be a part of a team really goes to show that he really has grown. And the fact that, when he first shows up in his own timeline, he is celebrating his birthday with his friends, all of his friends from the previous films, including his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend, Vanessa, which is very weird because they're very much in love, and you'd think after, saving her life, things would have gone gone along fine, but apparently not. So, yeah, they actually do have a very good birthday party, but then it's interrupted by the TVA, and he decides to essentially go with them, in the vain hope of him actually trying to get answers as to what's actually going on here. So what they actually try to do is they try to explain that essentially when one key variant in a timeline dies, the entire timeline of a specific world ends up disintegrating very slowly, and Deadpool thinks that it's actually him, but in reality it's Wolverine. So he tracks down a variant of Wolverine after the very dramatic and very kind of, very kind of final and very kind of beautiful ending of Logan. Deadpool, aka Wade, decides to go to a different timeline to try to track down his own version of Wolverine. And he tracks down his version of Wolverine, who is pretty much a drunk, and he pretty much spends his days at a local bar playing snooker and threatening any patrons with his Wolverine adamantium powers. And not only that, but they run into all sorts of different variants along the way. And this film is actually really wonderful. I really do love this film because it basically plays with a lot of expectations in regards to how things play out. They do a lot of very interesting things with different variants and different timelines. They actually do play around with a lot of different characters who were kind of scrapped characters from other variations of different Marvel comics. Like, say, for example, they have the character of Cassandra Xavier, who is the twin sister of Charles Xavier, who was, I think she was, don't quote me on this though, I think she was basically a scrapped character from the X-Men universe, and they basically, never used her again or utilised her again in any of the X-Men comics. So she basically is introduced when Deadpool and Wolverine end up in this place known as the Void, where they basically send all these variants who aren't wanted or who aren't relevant anymore, and they essentially turn it into a very Mad Max kind of style world, where there's a lot of desert action, a lot of people in motor vehicles, a lot of people screaming and shouting, and a lot of action and explosions. But not only that, but there's also a lot of insanity. Like, say, for example, and again, I do have to highlight massive spoilers for this film, including turning the Human Torch into a skinless human being from the Hellraiser franchise. Like, there's literally a moment where Cassandra basically just snaps her fingers, and then immediately the Human Torch's entire flesh structure just basically evaporates like milk down a drain. It's so horrific, but it's kind of beautiful, and I found myself laughing and kind of also at the same time going, what the fuck was that? Also strong language, by the way. But yes, this film was fabulous. It was amazing. I really do like the fact that Deadpool really does do a lot of very good stuff with character. Like, say, for example, with Wolverine, this version of Wolverine, he's much more careless, he's much more selfish, he has a lot more of a, I'm a lone wolf kind of character personality, which is wonderful in contrast to who Deadpool once was, because in the original films, like I said, he used to be the lone wolf. He used to be the guy who says, I don't want to be a part of a team, I work alone, and he would always make self-aware references, like when Colossus in the first film goes, oh, let's go and see the good Dr. Charles Xavier, and he goes, oh, which one? Is it McAvoy or Stewart? These alternate timelines are rather confusing, don't you think? And it's like, he constantly is making references about that, but in that first film, he was a bit of a lone wolf. He would love nothing more than just being on his own and doing his crazy, stupid shit. But what's very interesting is that he is like that. He was like that, but now he has a family, now he has friends, now he has people that he can rely on. He has all sorts of people who he calls his family or his found family, because he didn't really have much of a good family to begin with. He's found this family and he feels at peace. He wants to be a part of a team. He wants to be, he wants to feel wanted and a very crucial cog in that machine. Whereas Wolverine is kind of Deadpool as he was when he was in the early days of his career, back in the first film, where he was sort of like wanting to be a lone wolf or a lone ranger. And I really like that, because it's a wonderful way of him looking at a mirror version of himself without being too obvious about it. And I think it's very interesting that a lot of people say, oh, we've been waiting up for this team up for a while. Wolverine and Deadpool have been kind of like polar opposites, but also at the same time very complementary to each other's characters, because they are essentially the same person. Yeah, they have different gimmicks, but at the same time, I think Wolverine and Deadpool have a lot in common in regards to how they look at the world, how they see the world. Especially in that first X-Men film, Wolverine and Deadpool would have been brothers in arms. Like, they would have been drinking alcohol, they would have been doing lots of, small job mercenary stuff. I mean, if Deadpool hadn't become Deadpool and he was able to travel to these alternate universes and still remain who he was at the start of the first Deadpool film, you could pretty much see that, oh yeah, he could pretty much be with Logan in that bar, drinking, doing cage fights and things like that. Like, they pretty much would be the same sort of person, and I really like that. I really like that there is that sense of he's looking into a mirror. Deadpool's kind of looking into a mirror at his old self when he's looking at this version of Wolverine. And we find out through the majority of the story that he actually, in his timeline, he was out drinking on his own, and he should have been with his family, he should have been with the X-Men force. But these bunch of anti-mutant government assholes come into the the X-Men manor house, and they murder all of the variants of X-Men. They murder Cyclops, they murder Beast, they murder Nightcrawler, they murder all these different characters, they murder Rogue, they murder everybody. Everybody dies, they all get shot, and Wolverine is just left in the ashes to wallow in his failure. And he not only killed the anti-mutant arseholes, he killed everybody. He went after every single mutant who failed to protect his family. And that just goes to show how dark this version of Wolverine is, because he literally goes above and beyond to show that he isn't cuddly. He isn't the type of guy that you'd want to pose for a selfie for if you're at a theme park. He's the sort of guy who, if you crossed him or if you said the wrong word to him, he would embed his adamantium claws into your skull and think nothing of it. And it's a very, very dark way of portraying the character, but that's how Wolverine was before he joined the X-Men. He was very much gung-ho, and he didn't really care who he killed as long as it gave him some degree of brief satisfaction in whatever way possible. And it's really dark, but it's really kind of brilliant, because it also serves a contrast to Deadpool's character, who used to be like that but he no longer is. And there's all sorts of different characters that come into the fold, and it's really wonderful. I absolutely love this film. It's a fabulous, fabulous, fabulous film. I would highly recommend people watch it. If you're basically planning on going to go and see it, I would recommend doing it quickly, because it is bound to go off the air at one point. But given how much money it's making, it's going to stay in cinemas for a good long while, so you don't have to worry about it going off air anytime soon. But I would recommend watching it as quickly as possible, because it's amazing, and why would you want to miss out on watching this fabulous film? It's absolutely wonderful, and it's very funny too. There are so many gags in here that I don't want to spoil, because it's really, really funny. But it's a really, really great film. I really had a good time, and let me know what you guys thought of the Deadpool character and what you thought of how Deadpool's journey has been through that first film all the way to this entry. Did you think it was good? Did you think it felt kind of a bit, not as good as you thought it would be? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Please bear with me with the first entry in the IMDb 250 greatest films of all time list. I am getting on top of that, and look forward to more reviews very soon. And if you like this video, please be sure to give this film a thumbs up, and if you want to see more videos, please think about subscribing today. I hope you're all doing very well. Take care, bye for now.